It's really great to see everybody. I've been away from almost 20 years now, but coming back to Milwaukee it really is like coming back home. And I guess I was asked to talk about lessons from the Park-East, and I will say that, so I'm going to talk a little bit more than just lessons of the Park-East, lessons that I've learned working with some amazing people in this city, lessons that I learned from Larry Witzling and just fantastic people in this city. And so I talk a lot about rethinking highways in cities that are trying to take freeways out, right? Or they're rethinking it. This is some opportunity that we have that doesn't come often. So I guess I'd like to just share some things that, I guess, not just what I've learned from Milwaukee and what I've observed, but what I've seen happening in other cities. And I start with this notion of civic vision, right? And this idea of vision, and as a planner, people are, oh, vision, and they often think of like vision as something like flying cars, right? But vision is not that, right? Vision is being clear about your intentions. It's about being clear about how are we going to make a city, right? Who is going to make these decisions, and for whom are these decisions made? And so, this question about decision involves thinking about choices. And I'll get to that. But in 1995, when I was an adjunct teaching at the University of Wisconsin, we did this studio. And the commissioner read a quote. I completely forgot about that piece that I wrote for the journal. And I remember talking a lot about it with Larry in the car. We were going back and forth between projects. And anyways, it really helped me to think about what the possibilities were. And the students, right, I challenged them to define a civic vision for Milwaukee. Right? What could happen if the freeway weren't there? It's not about taking the freeway out. It's about making the city better. Right? It's not what we lose, it's what we gain. And so they did a lot of analysis of the evolution of the city and the downtown street blocks and the buildings and traffic, and they came up with these ideas and drawings of sort of the existing condition today and what could be. So you all know where Pompey Square is, right? Fantastic experience, right? So what they imagined in that particular location is just down Van Buren, right, from just south of Cathedral Square, creating another urban square, right, if the freeway weren't there. This idea of making public spaces and leveraging the value of the lakefront and thinking about towers that could line a new boulevard along the lakefront. And so this is a question of choice. And so part of this choice is thinking about how do we define public improvement, right? Because when you go to a public conversation about a highway or any kind of DOT thing, it's about public improvement, right? And so I think of the McGrath Highway, and I think, do you think these folks, when they go out and sit on their porch, thought that that was a significant improvement to our neighborhood when the McGrath Highway was built across the street from us, right? And my friend Ian Lockwood, who's an engineer, who speaks about replacing freeways in very elegant terms, right? He created this cartoon, right? So what do we mean by that? So I looked up different definitions of public improvement, right? Things that were done under the control of a government entity is paid for in whole or in part by funds of government. But I like this one, intended to enhance its value, beauty or utility, and or to adapt it to new and further purposes. That's how we need to think about public improvement, right? And so this is how I-70 in Denver used to be. I wouldn't say that these kids this is how they would walk to school, which is on the other side of the elevated freeway, right? I wouldn't say that they thought there was a public improvement to their neighborhood. And so we sit today in a very unique time and where we have a lot of opportunity. We have aging infrastructure. We still have trends of return to the city. We have successful examples of freeways being replaced globally, and we have federal funding opportunities. So, you know, the good news is our public infrastructure is aging significantly, right? And we constantly looking at ways to pay for this. The good news is, you know, because of increasing construction and greater fuel efficiency, the gas tax, the purchasing power of the gas tax is significantly eroded, right? And so we have to make different choices. It's like, I don't know if Lord Chamberlain said, in the most dire times of World War II, he said something like, gentlemen, we're all out of money. Now we have to think, right? And so, you know, we're sort of at that point. And, you know, the other good news is, right, the American Society of Civil Engineers gives America's infrastructure a grade average of C-, right? And teaching for more than 30 years, I can tell you, students are generally not happy about a C- grade. And our roads are at a D, right? So, as Gardner was just describing, right, there are trends, right? I mean, it's not like the world doesn't evolve. It's not like we don't rethink and evolve in terms of our connection to our cities. But there are a lot of trends that are pointing to what I call the failed experiment of building highways through cities that are changing. And the form of cities, right? Just think of Milwaukee's renaissance. At the time when I first moved here in the late 80s to now, the evolution of the city and how much better it is continuing to get. And so the other thing is, this is not a new idea, right? Here's the deal, Milwaukee. Milwaukee is at the forefront of replacing freeways, right? San Francisco did it, you hear about that a lot, right? Well, a freeway broke their freeway, right? The West Side Highway was replaced. Well, like a big truck broke the West Side Highway, right? The state of Wisconsin had just repaved the Park-East Freeway before we took it down, right? In other words, the question is, what's better for the future, right? And Milwaukee, when you read the literature on freeway removals, if you ever do a search, I'm sure you all research this, but it is always highlighted as one of the front runners. So the opportunity here, you know, like, this is not a new thing for Milwaukee. In fact, Milwaukee started a trend that is influencing how urbanists and how city leaders and how even our federal DOT is thinking about how to spend money. Right? So even though it was reduced from $15 billion to $1 billion, there is $1 billion in the IRA Act that is specifically focused on removing highways and cities. Right? This is a change. This is a shift in Washington in thinking and recognizing that we can't continue to just build cities and build highways and, right, expand our dependency on driving. Michigan DOT in Detroit, right, is just got a $105 million grant, an intra grant, right, to remove the 375. Detroit, right? Now, I think the thing that's really significant here is the change from an orientation of using government tax money and spending it on infrastructure. The program on TIFIA focuses on value capture. Like, value capture is something that the federal FHWA is talking about. I know this because I actually have done seminars with them on value capture. This idea that we would use taxpayer money in ways that creates value. Right? That seems to make a lot more sense, rather than creating or spending taxpayer money in ways that devalues. I mean, if you think about it, right? Spending money on highways in cities, it's a very un-American thing if you think about it. It's using taxpayer money in ways that devalues private real estate in the parts of our country that have the most valuable real estate, which is in cities, right? Why would we do that? Again, I think it's a failed experiment. It goes back to a very simple design flaw, okay? Limited access versus urban street networks. Limited access. That's actually what we call a freeway. It's limited access, right? And it's a design flaw because it doesn't recognize that cities are fundamentally for people. So if I'm traveling on I-70, as I did when I left Milwaukee and drove to Denver, to live in Denver, right? When you have an interstate, you don't want to be stopping at every county line road, right? So I understand, right? It makes sense. Limited access for intercity, interstate transportation. But it's fundamentally the wrong design. And I will tell you that Norman Bel-Geddes, right, the person credited with designing the American highway system in the 40s, which actually I will tell you is modeled after the German highway system that Hitler created. So Bel-Geddes didn't actually invent it, he just copied it. But the basic idea of this design was this, that we would connect city to city, right? Down on the bottom, you see the highway. You'd get off the highway, it would distribute, and it would distribute into the city grid, okay? That's how you make the most out of adding access and capacity to a transportation system. Even Jane Jacobs, you don't have to be an expert to know this, right? Jane Jacobs understood frequent streets and short blocks and their value to making human places. But what happened in the US is, for a lot of different reasons, and it isn't technical, it's completely political, these highways were cut through neighborhoods. They were cut through with the idea that we need to go right into the heart of the city with a high-speed freeway. But if you think about it, a limited access design makes no sense. Cities, from the beginning of time, have existed because of access and exchange. They support access, they rely on high access, and they support economic exchange, social exchange, cultural exchange, right? That's what makes a city from the very beginning in the first settlements. But a limited access highway in a city is completely the wrong design. Eisenhower, when he signed the Highway Act, objected to freeways cutting through cities. This was not the idea. This was not the idea at all. Yet we did it. And so in the Park-East, for example, the lesson, well, how many of you missed the Park-East, by the way? Okay. So, right, there were 3 ways on and 3 ways off. This is what creates congestion. This is the problem of limited access. Everyone is hurrying up to wait, right? To get in line, to get off or get on, right? In an urban system, and this is what we did, right, you want to have access. This notion that a highway or a freeway in a city enhances access is completely wrong from a very, very simple design perspective. If you have a street that is at grade and that it connects to the street grid, you can distribute traffic. It's actually more efficient, right? It's pretty simple, isn't it? Like, you think, how did we ever come up with this? So, right, the system, if we had 6 lanes, same number of lanes, 6 lanes north-south, 4 lanes east-west, if you compact them all to consolidate all of them together, you actually have a less supportive infrastructure system for development. And from a capacity and efficiency of moving vehicles, it performs lower, right? When there's a major accident on the 6-lane arterial, what do you do? Where do you go, right? When it's limited access, when there is an accident, and it happens once in a while, right? You have very few choices to get on or off. When you're in a city grid, when there's an accident, yeah, you might have to wait max half of a block, and then you turn and you go around it, right? You have access. That's what downtowns, that's how they work. In nature, this works, right? So a natural channel, when the natural course of a river moves through. You have suitable water temperatures that support life, plant life, fish. And right, it creates a very diversified habitat. When we channelize rivers and streams, the water temperature goes up, plant life dies, fish die. Like, it's just not a conducive system. Now, we know that now. Now, the Corps of Engineers used to think that we could control nature, fix flooding, channelize rivers and streams. Turns out, created more flooding. So now we're spending billions of dollars to daylight and undo this. Okay, so we can learn, we could redo it. But if you think about this, I think it's a very useful analogy to think about what makes life in a city. Right? How do you create a system of access and connectivity that would support vitality? So if you had a choice, would you choose to continue to make a city like this, or would you choose to make a city for people? It's a choice. It's fundamentally a simple choice. Because cities are fundamentally about people, right? We make them for people. We strive to make them beautiful for our own enjoyment, not for the enjoyment of cars. But if we prioritize making cities for cars, this is the best environment that you can create, right? Lots of parking stacked in lifeless buildings and endless lanes of travel to accommodate the car. Like, that's the highest and best achievement of human beings, right? No, that is what we get when we design for one mode, when we design for the car. But if we design for people, we obviously get much better environments. This was downtown Denver in the 30s on the left, and the public improvement of downtown Denver to create a lot of capacity for surface parking. Now, luckily, Denver's not like that anymore, but because all of that land was a significant land bank, that's creating new development opportunities in that city. So it's about capacity. And when I think about capacity, I think about how do we add choices and how do we make places versus solving for congestion. In other words, the design parameters to traffic engineering are far, far, far too constrained. Right? If we think about capacity, and here's another one of Ian's cartoons, right? On the left, here's the capacity of a street if you think of designing it only for a car. And that's all you get. If you think about designing a street for cars and people and bikes and different kind of land use, right? You get a different kind of outcome. And it's a real estate question. It's square footage. It's like, what's the decision about the allocation of space, precious space in a downtown? So if we're just designing for cars, right, and people are in those cars, that's how much space do we need for this many people? That's a lot of space, right? What if they were taking different modes, right? What if they were sitting in a transit vehicle? What would you do? We got some developers in the room. What would you do with more land? Like, could you figure out a way to capitalize on that in a different way? And what might that do in terms of return to the city, in terms of tax base, in terms of life? And so if we think about how do we organize the design of a city and how we think about the capacity of the street for more than just movement of cars, then we create actual places for people. So the Park-East, right, that was the lesson, is that it gave us a chance to create a new gateway to downtown, to improve access, remove a highway, improve access to downtown, right? And it's not just about access, it's about access that supports opportunities for development. That's the fundamental question. It's not a question about taking out a freeway and what do we lose, how do I get to this house? Like, it's about what's the intentionality? So here's a term I think many people in this room know, right? Return on investment, right? And how do we prioritize return on investment for local communities? How do we take this perspective of value added and value capture? I love this drawing. Many of you have probably seen this drawing, right? The ambition of Milwaukee, the design for parked ways in 1909, right? So what you see here is, right, there are lanes for travel, there's streetcar, there's sidewalks, beautifully planted street trees. an infrastructure that is so beautiful that you would want to have your office, you would have your apartment, right? That you would make infrastructure, like that's the reason why the private capital will go there, is because it's going to be great. It has high access and it's a beautiful street. This was the idea for growing Milwaukee, right? That was a simple diagram. And then, there are other ideas of how to solve the problem of cities, right? Just leave. Not great. So return on investment, the Embarcadero freeway came out. Did San Francisco suffer because this double-decker freeway was not replaced? No, if you've been to the San Francisco waterfront, it's amazing. What happened after that, and happened around the Central Freeway, the city only got better. So many of you might know about transit-oriented development, TOD, right? And that's one way to think about things, transit-oriented development. I've always had a little bit of trouble, though, of thinking about transit-oriented development, the term. And while we did a lot of things in Denver, I think about it more in terms of development-oriented transportation, which is an unfortunate acronym here, right? So, but right, to think about the choices that we make about transportation to be more development-oriented. So it's more like pot, right? Not because I'm from Colorado. Place-oriented transportation, right? That we think about the choices that we make based on the places that we want to have, right? I mean, when we redesigned Denver Union Station and had all of the transit stuff come in, it was first and foremost designed as, how is it a place to be? Not just moving people, right? Bringing in trains and buses, and how is it a place and a destination for people? In Seoul, Korea, right? Along the Cheonggyechon River, there was a freeway capping the river. They took it out, and it got better. And they took another one out, and they took out 15 freeways, and they significantly shifted Seoul from this kind of useless highway system to a robust system of bus rapid transit, and incredible value in real estate and incredible value in the quality of life in the city. So a couple of lessons that I've learned in Milwaukee is plan now. Have an urban vision, and it's a community vision, right? When we did the 1999, oh my God, that was so long ago. We did the 1999 downtown plan, right? Remember, Beth, right? Right, we did imagine a lot of things, right? Like taking out the Park-East, finishing the Riverwalk, a train station, a year-round market, right? New housing, converting one-way streets back to two-way, right? A lot of things. And, Milwaukee, it was a 20-year plan, and most of the things got done like in 10 years. And so you updated the plan, I think, 2010 or 2012. And the Park-East was part of that, right? Rethinking what could happen in the Park-East. And, we did drawings, and they look kind of not so sophisticated now, but that was a long time ago. But the idea of it, the plan, the policy was there. We didn't necessarily have an idea how we would do it, okay? We understood that we didn't have the money at the time to do it. What we understood is setting the vision now, in 1999, right? To say, when that decision comes up of what to do with the Park-East Freeway, the city council, right, has expressed what it wants to see happen. Now, I don't know if you all remember this, but, the Harley experience. So Harley was looking to cite the Harley experience, the museum. And at the time, Milwaukee had in the plan, right, replace the Park-East Freeway with a street grid and development. And at the time, the governor didn't like the idea of that at all, right? But Harley was looking for a site, and they looked at the downtown plan, and they saw this catalytic project for the entertainment district between 4th and 6th. And they said, we really like that riverfront location. We would really like to look at this for the Harley experience. And so we said, well, you could maybe help us out with the governor because he hates it. So when Harley went with the city to talk about it, Tommy Thompson loved the idea of taking out the freeway, right? And that's what helped us get it going. And ultimately, they didn't locate there, right? They're in the valley, a great location in the valley. But we are already underway, right, with executing on the plan to demolish the highway, replace it with a street grid in support of Harley's project. I guess what I'm saying is you kind of don't know when you have the opportunity. But have a point of view, right? Express it in the adopted plans. And right now, you're in that moment, right? You've got this great proposal, these ideas, these explorations of what can happen. And again, it's not the first time this is ever happening in the world. It's not the first time it's happening in Milwaukee, right? And so this is a perfect time. So one of the things that's critical is having a code, right? Having a clear, predictable system. And Larry Witzling helped us with creating a very simple code of activated streets and a very simple menu of building types that has resulted in, billions of dollars of development in and around the Park-East, right? Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, it's taken so long and blah, 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 right? But here's the deal, right? It didn't really take that long. If you think about it, if you've been tracking that, all of the privately held parcels around the Park-East Freeway, they developed first, right? Like, I don't know, Bob, would you have been involved, would you have been interested in developing the north end if the Park-East Freeway was still there?
Much less.
Yeah, a lot less, right? So there's just a lot of private transactions that were driven on the expectation of the freeway coming out and being replaced by a street grid. And today, as one walks around, you see it. Now, another critical lesson that I often tell cities that I'm working with is own it. I don't know if you need to own it necessarily, but control it. That there needs to be a priority on swift land transfer and local control. And what I mean by that is, for this amount of land, that's the amount of area that was in the redevelopment plan. The area that's colored is land that was in the right-of-way. And as you all might know, or you might not know, the county, Milwaukee County, was the entity that acquired the land on behalf of the state and the Fed. So when it was decommissioned, the land went first to the county, which are kind of the last pieces of land to develop, right? Okay? The thing is we didn't pay the Fed back for that. This is really important. Okay? Because if you think about the public good, as Taylor has described, right, the public good that you could do when the basis in the land is nothing is pretty significant from a public interest perspective, right? And so that is really important. Now, lately in some states, they're like, oh, if we take it out, you got to pay us back. I mean, that's just bullshit. So, if you think about it, right, of how much damage these public improvements have made to our cities and disconnecting our neighborhoods. So, that's what happened in Milwaukee to some degree. I think it could be taken even further. And, also to think about, like, when you remove this, there's a lot of heavy infrastructure underground too, right? So that's not a nothing cost. And so, sometimes maybe you can think about maybe maintaining some of these things. In Seoul, they actually maintain some of the supports. There's, right, great placemaking that's already happened under 794. Maybe parts of the deck could stay. If you know the High Line in New York City, maybe above the public market, there's a lid that just stays there, and you can go up to a green space. I don't know, whatever. But right, there's a lot of different things that could happen that don't necessarily, that could be public spaces that don't necessarily have to be all development. And I think the lesson from the beer line is that MMSD is the entity that acquired all the land for the Deep Terminal project, right? And what the city did and what Department of City Development did is essentially act as their broker, right? We did the plan with the neighborhood, we did the code, we did a TIF, built a lot of infrastructure to reconnect the neighborhood, connect the neighborhood that was never connected to the river, connect the river and the river walk to the rest of downtown, and acted on behalf of MSD. MMSD is not a development entity, right? Department of City Development is a development entity, right? And so just as a partnership, I do think that Beer Line presents a really good example. So fundamentally, I would say this boils down to leadership. This is not a technical question about whether you can replace a freeway with a street grid. That's not a technical, engineers are smart, they can figure it out, right? It's a political one, right? And as I said, we have federal, state infrastructure, sort of perceptions of infrastructure evolving, bending toward this idea. And right, here's John Norquist it just gave him such a headache. Says he's finally getting some relief that the freeway is coming down, right? But it is, like I said, it's not technical, right? The traffic will move. If people are afraid of what happens to the traffic, as I said, every single time a freeway came out, a neighborhood got better, and access got better. Every time a freeway was cut into a neighborhood, it didn't get better. If any of you have an example of a neighborhood that got better when a freeway was cut through it or over it, I'd love to see it because I've never found one. So just a conclusion. Just think about it, right? Land. They're not making it anymore. In Dallas, right, there's this fantastic proposal for rethinking how they could actually create 245 acres of new land in Dallas by rethinking their transit and their highway system. And so, you know, we need to think about, like, people want to be together, right? This is how we make, this is the fundamental perspective of what makes great places. So, at the end of the day, I think some things to think about that we've all together have learned is that strong community support with extraordinary leadership and political will is required to do something this big. You need an urban vision for the city, not dominated by the automobile, that prioritizes the short trip over the long trip. The short trip is really critical here. And that the decision processes are driven by long-term community investment, public and private, versus sort of, you know, money burning a hole in your pocket, like this pressure of, well, we have to spend this federal money, right, within this given time frame. It's an artificial and useless kind of urgency. That the return on investment is a priority for the local community, that there is local land control, and as I said, recognizing that it's not technical, it's political. So the downtown plan guided a lot of good stuff. The next plan guided a lot of stuff. You are right now today, right, having, is it planning board discussion? Nice, a planning commission. And there's a discussion of this idea among many other great ideas for the future. And so I wish you all very well. Thanks.
Why don't we, I know that Andy's working on this, trying to make it work from a standpoint. I'm gonna hop right into it here. I mean, as you looked in the 90s at this issue, kind of what were the objections you heard from the retailers, from the offices, from the people out there, and then how did you address them when it comes to that side of downtown?
Yeah. What did we hear? How will people get to work? It's going to cause congestion and Carmageddon. I guess that was mostly it.
Kind of Carmageddon, which I've heard a lot here over the past couple months.
Yeah.
So how did you address them, and how do you think it turned out?
So we showed drawings like the one I showed,
Right.
that talks about how we're actually increasing access. Again, I mean, I get it. If you just start with the perception that a proposal is to take out a freeway, I totally understand, right? The knee-jerk reaction is, well, where do the cars go, and how will people get to work, and how, and I think we didn't talk about it in terms of taking out the freeway. We talked about it in terms of, in fact, some of those drawings I showed you are very old, right? Obviously, that. It was about how we were going to increase access and make it more efficient. Because again, if you think about it, hey, do you know this term induced travel? Okay. So I was talking about unintended consequences, right? So induced travel occurs, especially when you have limited access highway in a street grid, right? Because basically, right, you have to overshoot your destination and then work your way back through the street grid. Well, okay, if you multiply that, right, by all the travel that's going on. I mean, very few people were necessarily getting off the Park-East on the north-south street that they needed to travel to get to their destination, right? And so if you actually create more options for where they can make their turn, you're actually distributing the traffic much better and reducing induced travel in downtown, right? But again, if you concentrate it all, I mean, just, that there's only a few ways to get onto the freeway. Go to every other street that, like the streets that lead to the on-ramp get congested, and the other ones are just, there's nothing going on, right?
As you look back at it, I mean, I remember this. I was around when this all happened. It was not an easy process. You look back now, and it sounds like it was easy, and it really wasn't. It was obviously driven through a mayor who really wanted it.
Yeah.
Kind of explain to me, what was the one step or the one thing that happened that you think that really drove it to success?
I don't know that the one thing is there was not one thing. Okay. In that, I do think that the conversations that we had in doing the 1999 downtown plan, I remember we that was like a pretty significant change in how we did planning in Milwaukee that had quite a lot of public engagement. And I think, I don't know, we had like 350 people in a room, and we talked about, what do you imagine the next 20 years in downtown Milwaukee? And I think every single table did not imagine the downtown freeways in downtown. It's not like we were really pushing it hard. I mean, I think we had some models that we did at UWM showing what could happen. But I guess the thing is it was sort of like putting a question to the participants, like, what do you imagine downtown? So I think that was pretty significant, that it was embedded in the downtown plan. Right. It was a policy of city council. I think the other major thing, as I said, I described. I mean, I think when Harley, again, saw what was imagined in the plan and it fit to their ambition of creating the Harley experience, that's what sort of got us off the hump politically. And there was something like $25 million in iced tea money that the city and county and state had for years not come to a decision of what they were going to do with it. And so that was identified, that 25 million was identified as, this is a good idea, right?
Let's also, one thing you said, which I think is important in terms of kind of somebody that led the effort. And you clearly had a mayor at that time who, would it be fair to say, was anti-freeway? Would that be a fair statement? Like he hated, everyone thought
Yes.
he hated cars. I'm not sure if
Yes.
that's true, but that was the theory at least. So,
Yeah.
I mean, is that key? I mean, is there somebody or some agency that
well,
drives this process?
Totally. I mean, it is not technical. It is purely political. And the reason why freeways cut through downtowns and cut through neighborhoods, as I said, that was not the original design. That was not what Eisenhower was supporting. But and it's a long story. But just the politics of state and city politics, combined with urban renewal, and anyway, that was not the technical answer, right? And I describe this again as this extraordinarily, I mean, this big failed experiment in the American experience, because it is just proven not to work, right? It has harmed communities. It's divided communities. It has reduced the value of real estate. And as I said, there's not a single example across the world where when a freeway came out, things got worse. Every single time it gets better. So what are we afraid of?
Well, maybe I'll go that way. I had a roundtable earlier this year in January with a lot of CEOs in town who operate right in the heart of the city. And while they were open to it, the number one issue was access. Kind of as you said, all their employees, how they get into downtown, how they get out of downtown, what's easiest for them. Yep. How do you convince those? Because I can tell you, in the room, there was a lot of skepticism. Yeah. How do you convince them of this?
I guess I would just have to say, did things get worse in getting to downtown Milwaukee because of Park-East Freeway came out? I mean, it's not theoretical in this city, right? So, I don't know, maybe it's been so long, you forget. But, I think that, because it's proven itself here. And it's proven itself in every other city. The other part of it is what Gard was talking about in terms of talent and attracting young talent.
Right. And
that talent quite often wants to live downtown, near downtown, and have alternatives to dependency on driving, and take a scooter or a bike or walk. That is where the future of cities are, right? It's not theory. When I first started in my career, it was like we were really trying hard to get people to come back to cities, right? We worked really hard. And we worked so hard, now cities are very expensive. But, that's just kind of part of the wicked problems that we face. It keeps planners continuously employed. But,
Full Employment Act.
Yeah. But ultimately, right, if we're making better places for people, there's no downside to that.
Let's look at, or let's kind of talk about now what's going on here today, and all the options that are out there that are on the kind of thinking from a full kind of tear down to options. And probably one of the things I'm hearing more over the past couple months is there a compromise? Is there a way to just rip down a few ramps to open up some more room but still have the throughway? Kind of what is your reaction? Is this an all or nothing approach?
Well, I guess, to me, it's just fundamentally what is the problem that we're solving for here, right? A third of the traffic is going north, a third of the traffic is going south, and a third of the traffic is going through. Is that right, Taylor? Yep. Okay. So 2/3 of the traffic is trying to get to downtown, 1/3 of the traffic is trying to just blow through downtown. What's the priority for the city? What's the priority for downtown, right? That's one perspective. And so I would say anything that optimizes the opportunity to strengthen the connection between the Third Ward and the rest of downtown, to deliver and implement on the vision that's described in the downtown plan and every single downtown plan that in the latest version, really focusing on multimodal, walkable places for people and places to live and shop and play. Those should be the guiding criteria for whatever that decision is. And I think, is there a compromise? I mean, again, I mean, removing ramps, that only reduces access, if you think about it, right? So then it just becomes truly just a highway serving just that 1/3 demand, right? There are, I don't know if it's a compromise, but there are different configurations of boulevards that you can make. So if any of you have been to like cities like Paris or Lisbon or like cities across the world, there are design of streets that are multi-way boulevards, which prioritize through traffic, but also create beautiful. So if you think of like a lot of beautiful Parisian boulevards, they are very walkable. Paris is a pretty nice city. You can walk around.
I've heard that.
But there's also a lot of carrying capacity from the design of the streets. So it's not an either-or proposition, right? Can't we demand both and, right?
I want to ask one more question, and then I would say bring up our panel to have a discussion. But we've had for years in Milwaukee a mentality of cars, kind of cars first. And obviously Mayor Norgerson and others have tried to change that.
Milwaukee's not unique.
It's not. I understand, but I'm talking about the current discussion and what we're talking here. How do you change that? How do you get others to understand this other options, whether it's transit, whether it's bikes, whether it's kind of connecting the city? When I want to drive my car, I want to park right next to my office building. I want to park right next to the store. I want to get in. I want to get out quickly. I mean, here it's a mentality for years and years.
Yeah, but I think it's changing.
Slowly.
It's evolving.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not against cars. I like, people know me. I like cars. I'm kind of very interested in them, right?
You have a hot rod, right?
Yeah. But it's to me, I think that's not a way of framing the choices, right? And quite frankly, I think humans generally are kind of lazy in a way, right? While we love our car, if there's a superior way for us to move around that takes less time, that's what we do, right? And so if we are kind of this country that talks about choice and freedom of choice, why would we design a city that limits the choice and dependency on one mode of travel? If you really think about choice, let me decide whether I'm going to drive, or if I'm going to take my bike, or if I'm going to walk, or right, grab a scooter. Like, let me decide. But if we prioritize all our decisions, assuming everyone drives, or someone will drive them, then we get, like I showed, we get a city that's surface parking lots and empty streets.
I'm going to ask our panel to come up here, come forward, as I also then kind of ask for your thoughts on one of the things we talked about is who owns the land, and one of the things that held back on the northern end of downtown was the ownership through the county in terms of how long it take. Who would you recommend owns the land if this occurs to encourage it to happen at a quicker pace?
Well, I think the county could own the land. The county doesn't have a mission of development and building the city of Milwaukee. The Department of City Development does, right? The Redevelopment Authority does. And so, like I said, the model that we used in the beer line was MMSD owned the land, right? But we essentially acted, as I said, kind of like their broker,
right?
And we were kind of like the master developer in a way. But and I don't know, Julie, what did we do? Just write them checks or something?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. But right. There was a memorandum of understanding between the two.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that's that makes sense, right? The county's got a lot of other responsibilities, right?
But in this case, actually, a majority of the land was owned by the state under the freeway. So in a sense, you'd say transfer it to the county, transfer it to a nonprofit. Kind of what would expedite?
I think it could be a variety. It's more land,
right?
So
it is.
I think there are a lot of different models, and again, I said that compared to 20 years ago, we have a federal government, we have a FHWA that is talking about value capture. They're talking about, the TIFIA program. I don't know if you know, but it's a loan, right? So we use the TIFIA loan for Denver Union Station, which means that if we're going to borrow this public money, there's an assumption that there's going to be a return on investment to pay back the loan and the interest. It's a very favorable interest. But I think that's, to me, that's a very American way of thinking about how do we use capital in a way with the expectation that there's a return on that investment rather than just, like I said, just spending tax dollars on infrastructure that is not really helping drive private investment.
Okay. Let's kind of expand this discussion to the whole group. And since you did sit next to me, I'm going to ask you first, Bob. He asked you the question quietly here, but I'll ask you the question in terms of the north end. Would you have built that project if the Park-East was still in place?
We probably wouldn't have built something as aggressive as we ended up building there. The view that we had across the street was one of those beautiful, side views of the ramps flying all over the place. There was no ability to develop any character along Water Street. It was not a place that you could think of people wanting to live because of the presence of the freeway. So I think that when you remove that impediment, and a lot of the photos that Peter shared from around different examples show the impacts of freeways on the adjoining land use and the character of the adjoining land uses. So, the north end may not have ever happened with that Park-East Freeway up. The other thing that's a really interesting anecdote, Peter, I've never talked to you about this, but so we opened the East Point Marketplace, and Dick Lincoln's here somewhere. Dick is, are you still awake back there, Dick? Oh, he's still awake. Okay. But in 1994, we opened up East Point Marketplace, and Bob Gold opened up Pick and Save Marketplace. And that opened up prior to the demolition of the Park-East Freeway. Now, he was one of those people that had a lot of trepidation about that freeway coming down because
it emptied.
He saw it delivering customers right to his front door.
Literally, right to his front door.
Literally. So what happened was that the freeway came down, and we had a percentage rent clause with Bob Gold, and his store sales they kept on growing. They were off the charts. The freeway had no impact on his sales volume. It got so dramatically into percentage rents, and they were paying us so much more additional rent every year that Roundy said, we're going to screw those guys. We're going to open up 2 blocks away Metro Marketplace. So they opened up the Metro Mart to literally take the heat off of East Point Marketplace because they were paying us $150,000 to $200,000 a year more rent just based on absolutely historic sales at that food store. And the freeway had no impact on the growth of that food store's sales. So impact on businesses, you can take freeways out and really people find a way to get there.
Let's talk. I guess I want to open it up to people, just kind of your reaction to some of the things you heard this morning, and then kind of your thoughts on the current plan for 794. If it is removed. Bill, I'll start with you.
Make sure this is working. Hi, everybody. Bill Boniface, CBRE. Thanks for letting me be here today. I love it. I think we have to do it. I think from nearly every standpoint that I've heard, it makes total sense because if you want to look at a public investment, you have to have a benefit cost analysis, right? And there'll be tangible costs that you can identify. So if you're going to rebuild a freeway anyway, you have to do it at some point, and that's $300 million or whatever it is. And versus taking it down, you can look at the raw economics of it. You do have to look also, though, at the externalities. Is it going to create pollution? Is it going to hurt people's use of the city? All that. But if you look at it in total, there will be people that are disadvantaged, and that will be the 1/3 of the people currently in flow now that are going to Bayview or whatever. So that's the part of, we don't always like who our president is or who we vote for. We just accept that sometimes we're not in the majority. And I think the people that are going to be in the minority they can bitch, and, I don't blame them. They're impacted. But for the rest of society, if you look at it, and we have a generational opportunity that 100 years from now or whatever, we're going to go, boy, we're glad we did that. Because you look at the connectivity between Third Ward, downtown, what this will mean aesthetically. We keep the momentum going. So I'm all for it.
All right. I'm going to go to Beth. You obviously have a lot of members. You have a lot of people throughout the downtown. What are you hearing from your members? And kind of what is the opposition you're hearing, and kind of how would it be addressed?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. And just to the bold vision that this entire conversation has created. And I can't help, with Peter being here, being very reminiscent about the 1999 plan. I can't help but remember all of the talk radio conversations around how 26 acres of developable land were really going to destroy our city. But it also goes back to, how were we ever going to clean up this polluted river, and our back should remain to the river. So lots of trauma I'm working through right now. And then Park-East, I lived on Lyon and Astor Street for a decade, and I can't tell you how many times out in my tiny little front yard, Bruce Wessling, you know where it is because that was one of your regular drive routes, I think. But how many little old ladies would come by and say, oh, my parents' house was right across the street over there. And they would have tears in their eyes. So the devastation is real, right, of what freeways have done to this country. And I've always been curious about Eisenhower and his philosophy and why he wanted to ruin our cities. But Peter, thank you for the clarification today. That wasn't the true intent. But what are our members saying? It's early in the process. And I think we have to just be realistic about the realities of what urban sprawl has created. We are in the midst of attracting significant investment in downtown Milwaukee. A lot of our workforce lives in the suburbs. We want to grow our residential population. We want to grow our workforce population downtown. We unfortunately were not able to create a regional transit authority at the state level. We need to be holistic about the ways in which we look at really having a strong and healthy multimodal urban community. So for me, it's not tear it down or keep it up. It is about clearly the need. Number one, we have built a beautiful community. We have a beautiful built environment. We have fresh water resources. I-794 rethink is absolutely necessary. And this is a bold vision. But I also want us all to be thoughtful about what sprawl has created, the true issues that we have to contend with as we're growing our population to the Milwaukee million, and really being thoughtful about what the modernization of this old, aged infrastructure has done to our community, but how we can be bold in moving it forward. And so the bid has not taken a position yet. Clearly, we were actively engaged in the work that was done in creating community dialogue around the future of downtown through Connecting MKE. And we heard significant input about how important connectivity is, connecting our neighborhoods, creating spaces for drivers and non-drivers, bicyclists, mass transit, pedestrians, people with buggies and carriages. Oh, we don't use buggies anymore. So all I can tell you is we have an interested downtown community that is significantly invested in the future of our community.
And what are you hearing in terms of their concerns? I mean, is it access? I mean, is employees getting in and out? What specific things are you hearing?
Conversations around accessibility. If you have a workforce that's coming in from the south or the west, how will we get them there? What will the implications be? What does the real modeling look like? I mean, this is one piece of our entire interstate system in our region, in our state. So what are those implications for moving goods and services? What are implications for getting people to their jobs? What I love about today and about best practices we've been engaged in the past, i.e. Park-East, coming down, the deconstruction, as we like to call it, is that we do have some best practices in front of us. I think we've got some good, bold, visionary concepts in front of us, but we also have to be cognizant of what sprawl has done to our community and how we respond to that holistically with transportation, with cars, and reinstilling the street grid. We've absolutely proven that adding developable land opportunities to this fabulous city of Milwaukee, we will attract more investment. So this is the dialogue that we're having. Our stakeholders are extraordinarily thoughtful about this. And to what Commissioner Crump said earlier, we have to protect those that have invested in this community. I am so gratified that we're having this dialogue because we will get to the best end, the best decision.
I'm going to go down to you, Jim, in terms of what's going on in the Third Ward. Obviously, a tremendous amount of success. What more could happen under the freeway? What do you see happening there that could enhance the Third Ward, but also enhance kind of what I see right now is the somehow much more of a connection between that area and the downtown?
Thank you, Mark. And thanks for inviting me. The I-74 Rethink folks, thank you. Peter, it's great to see you and hear your thoughts. And I hope you appreciate, especially when you visit Milwaukee, your legacy lives on, especially in our downtown neighborhoods between you and Mayor Norquist and Julie and the rest of the administration. I'd echo some of Beth's sentiments. We've got some of the most sophisticated real estate folks on my bid board or association board. And one thing I'm happy to report is that the Third Ward is on fire. You guys maybe notice it as you visit the market or visit your favorite shop or restaurant. But from occupancy to development energy to the market numbers, we are already surpassing 18 and 19 numbers at the public market. And we've got a data service we subscribe to, Placer AI. Some of the brokers in the room have it. We're at and above our 18 and 19 visitor numbers. And to that visitor number, and again, just let me preface all of my comments today. Philosophically, I am on board with everything that Peter teaches and preaches and everything the Rethink group is trying to do. But the reality is the built environment and what we've built in the Third Ward is succeeding despite the freeway barrier to downtown and the success that Matt Dorner's work with Paul Schwartz from the market and the bid have done in reimagining these spaces under the freeway. So we've got 5.4 million visitors to the Third Ward in the last 12 months. 52% of those come from 10 miles or more away. So again, we're listening. We want to talk about this. We're very interested in the alternatives that do a little bit of both. But I think it's not broken in the Third Ward, despite this freeway barrier. And we want to make sure that we continue that progress. I mean, we've got tens of millions of dollars of development right now on top of the freeway, whether it was 321 Robert Joseph's building, the Heinz development, and now the Foxtown Brewery. That's right on top of the freeway, and it's happening. And I think, and I'm not speaking for Beth, but on the flip side of the freeway, on the Easttown side, I think that energy is palpable as well and is happening. So I think we just have to keep this in mind as we go forward talking about this. Peter's right. These are successes throughout the world. But what's the tipping point for there's no doubt there's success for the third ward on the other side of a tear down, but getting there could be problematic.
How so? Kind of what are you hearing, and what are those specific issues?
Well, I think the most glaring one for us, at least in early DOT numbers that we've seen from the stakeholder group who participated, the impact of traffic counts on streets in the third ward. For instance, we are right now lobbying hard with the city of Milwaukee to narrow Water Street, to bring out the sidewalks, not to paint lines, not to put plastic pylons, but we want to bring out the sidewalks and make Water Street similar to Broadway in Milwaukee. That could be next to impossible in a teardown situation in the traffic that Water Street may be asked to handle, or the traffic that will be placed onto Milwaukee Street that is already, just a single lane. It's one of the only bridges going across the river. So that's probably one of our strongest concerns, or forcing more traffic onto St. Paul. You really can't, basically because of the streetcar, and you can't widen it. It's in a built environment. So that's probably the biggest glaring concern to a teardown, is the impacts of traffic counts throughout the third ward.
Interesting. I'll talk to you, Tim. I know you have a very strong opinion on this topic, but you're a real estate developer, the heart of downtown. You obviously have a scent. You have strong opinions, no doubt. You have Ascent, you have Nova, looking at other things. What is your reaction to this? What could it mean for you and for others in terms of that area?
I don't think it's about what it means for us.
Right.
I think it's what it means for the city and for the region. And I've said this before. We do ourselves a disservice as a city and a region by saying that, look at all the great things that are happening downtown. Because there are great things happening downtown. And yet at the same time, it's clearly not enough, because the city of Milwaukee is losing population and is getting beaten by its peers across the Midwest and across the country. And so when we talk about, should it be torn down or can it be a compromise? What would the Park-East look like if it were compromised? Would we have a Fiserv Forum? Would we have the North End in the same configuration that it is, and all of the other buildings? What would Ascent look like if it was compromised? The city of Milwaukee has been great at compromising. And good enough is not good enough. And the marketplace is clearly showing us that. We have the lowest rate of unemployment as a state and as a region across the country. Why? Because we can't get people to come here. We have regional relocations to downtown Milwaukee. Northwestern Mutual is, right, if parking mattered, Northwestern Mutual wouldn't be consolidating downtown Milwaukee. They would keep their Franklin campus. But they're sending a clear message. That's not what matters. What matters is creating a narrative for the city of Milwaukee to stand out from its peers on a national platform and say, you should be here because we do cool shit. I recently read a piece by Dror Poleg. He's a futurist and a thinker, and he said, if we zoom out and we look at the history of how our cities over the centuries have been designed and built. We used to have an agrarian state, and everything was built around farms. And then we had an industrial economy, and everything was built around factories, right? We used to have a lot of factories, not just across North America. And if aliens landed in any city today, they would say, well, clearly the most important thing to you is going in and out of the office. But it's not true. And the compromise conversation and the let's think about traffic first is a backwards approach to city design. That's how I feel about 794.
Chris, like I said, very strong opinions. I like that. Chris, from an architecture standpoint, what do you see as the potential for under the freeway? What could we see there? What could be added that would enhance the city?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Tim. Everybody up here, I got to say, I just want to take a moment, right? Because We had the TKWA had the great pleasure of being the lead consultant to Bid 21 and Department of City Development, updating the plan that was put together years and years ago, and it paved the way for all of us sitting in this room right now. There's no way this conversation would have happened a decade ago. It certainly wouldn't have happened in 1999, where, sure, people in the know kind of talk about this and dream about what's possible, but there is an enlightening, there's an awakening. Mark, you asked about how do we change mindsets. The minds are changing. We're all here kind of asking for the same thing, but understand this is complicated, and how do we get there? This isn't our change. This is our kids' change. It's their kids' change. We need to talk about this as a generational shift. It's not for us. It's for who's going to come. So when I think about, what can you replace it with? I love what Peter's saying about it's not what you take away, it's what you build back, right? And Peter totally stole my thunder bringing up Paris, because how many Tour de France fans do we have in the house? Am I the only one? Oh, thank God. I'm on 15 days into this 21 day event, and it's so much fun. And I'm always reminded of the Champs-Élysées at the end, right? And I looked it up because I was curious, because I use it as a frame of reference. And the Champs-Élysées carries, I think today, about 100,000 cars daily. That doesn't even come close to the numbers that we saw at the very beginning of this story, right? Now, how many people, when they go to Paris and they say, I want to go to Champs-Élysées, talk about all the traffic on the street? Nobody, right? That's not what you're talking about. And the reason you're not talking about that is that street has 70-foot wide sidewalks on both sides of it. And those 70-foot sidewalks allow the most majestic alley of trees that we know in modern history, right? They allow the cafe culture to thrive. They allow people watching to thrive. They allow just the possibility to be a thing, So I think it's the devil's in the details, how you build the public realm. And here's the thing, Paris isn't satisfied with the Champs-Élysées. They're talking about a radical transformation of it, actually reducing the traffic, giving more space over to people. So what I think ought to happen here is we need to design a place that is so freaking amazing that our kids are sitting in here, 20 years down the road when the next pieces of the puzzle fall, that they're going, how do we extend that thing that's so amazing? Milwaukee is on the map as a result. I mean, what Peter and Mayor Norquist did tearing down this freeway, I remember being a student at UWM, and I was so proud to be a Milwaukee guy because we're such an aw shucks, Midwestern nice city. Fuck that. We tore down a freeway and the world noticed. Okay? So
I'm telling you, there's a lot of swearing on this panel. I think I'm at a Foo Fighters show, for heaven's sake. Tanya, from a planning standpoint, kind of as you look back 20 years to what happened in the Park-East, what do you think are the lessons learned? What do you think, as a community, we should learn from what happened there?
Thank you for it's great being here. Thank you so much. And I serve as the city's long-range planning manager, so I really feel like it's just a wonderful thing to be here and be looking in this way with all of you. I think 20 years ago for Park-East, obviously there was really strong vision, strong leadership. We have the leadership and the community in place still as a result of that, seeing the success, right? Certainly there are lessons learned, there always are, and we good Midwesterners are always going to be modest and thoughtful and think about that. While there are some lessons learned, I think, from the beginning, there was that strong vision for public good, public benefit, and public life that flourishes in that corridor. And sure, maybe Water Street could be a little narrower now. Maybe those height minimums that we had in the redevelopment plan didn't need to be there in the way that we had them. But that strong vision to create those places was absolutely critical and is something that we, no doubt, need to, bookmark that page for what this conversation is here today about 794. This corridor has tremendous opportunity and is probably the most important critical point in our city as we're talking about the multimodal mixed-use solution that we will have here whatever it ends up being. And there's so many potential opportunities. But one of them, too, is those connections, which I know everyone has talked about at length. But I just really want to take a moment to think about how important that is. Park-East showed us the potential for connectivity, but this particular land connects us to Lake Michigan, and our connectivity to the lake still leaves a lot to be desired. While we were doing the downtown area planning process recently, unprecedented comments about connectivity and making our streets for people in downtown and the rest of the city for that matter. We've never received so many comments on a planning process at all, and I think this is an exciting time to be doing planning and be thoughtful. And so I think another important lesson learned from Park-East was that planning process, right? The results are astounding, but without that thoughtful planning process that took a lot of time, we wouldn't be where we are today. And so I think really making the most of all of this, which is why I think this dialogue today is so critical. I think WisDOT's planning process is so critical, and us really making sure that we explore all of these options of removal and what makes that possible. And if there are challenges, digging further into what those are, and what those opportunities are around. Because I think, Mark, when we were prepping for this, you asked if there was middle ground, and I just frankly don't think there can be, because we're talking about needing on-the-ground solutions, and we have an elevated freeway. And I just don't see that middle ground is possible at all because of all of this. It's up or down is where we are. And I had to laugh, Tim, when you mentioned if aliens landed and they saw us, they would reflect on our going in and out of offices. I really think they would think that we worshiped cars. And I really want us to think about that. We are a city where reckless driving is an epidemic, and it's not just impacting our city, but I think we really need to take this in stride and think very thoughtfully about this multifaceted project and the future it has for Milwaukee and our entire region, because this region would not be the success it is and be growing the way it is without our city. And so I'll just kind of wrap up with one of my favorite comments during our planning process was, we need to design our city and think about our downtown for Milwaukeeans.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let you have the last word since you started this. I'm going to let you end it. You've heard kind of the reaction. You've heard some of the concerns with traffic, with accessibility, some of the some things, and then you've heard some things that can happen. Kind of, what is your advice to all of us in the room on this process? One, in terms of how to address the concerns, and two, how to make this happen, if that's the choice of the community. No pressure, but I'm going to record this, so we'll play it later.
Just keep doing what is happening right now, which is have this conversation. You've got the downtown plan coming up. Implement it. Right? We don't make plans to sit on shelves. We make plans to do shit, right? And so, that's happening. You've got a department, you've got a mayor committed to engaging the community, considering some bold ideas. You got, I would consider these guys young folks. That they don't know who I was, right? They were just like, oh, Jeff Bentoff said we should call you because you, right?
You once were here and you had some good ideas.
They have no idea, right?
We all remember you, Peter. Don't we?
Yeah, no, that's
us older people do.
No, but what I'm saying is that's that generation is raising this idea up, right? You had people, right? You had voices in the downtown plan, right? It is the people that are going to inherit this city, and those after them. And the actions that we are involved in right now, right, are setting the stage for what kind of greatness that can be. So I'm very, very hopeful for this city, and I really want to, just do it. Just keep going.
Well, let me though kind of have you answer the question in terms of the accessibility of the Water Street, because I think one of the things you've heard from people
Yeah.
is that question. You being a planner,
Yeah.
and what's your advice on how to handle that? Because that's again the number one issue
Yeah.
throughout this community is that.
So again, so think about it is about distributing traffic. Right?
Right.
And that's fine. And the more ways that traffic has to flow, it will. Just the behavior of how you drive. Like just because this is my normal route,
Right.
if today there's an accident, I'm going to go a different way. But if I don't have the choice because there's not a rich network to move around in, then I'm stuck, right? And so the thing about traffic modeling is it makes certain assumptions, right? So if any of you use like Google Maps, or like when you're looking at in a new city and you look at the traffic, right? Or you ask for routing, like before Waze and before crowdsource, it would always assume that it's going to take you on the arterials and on the freeways because they're the fastest routes. And in fact, you're puzzled because it's showing me this route and it's all red. So why is it telling me to go on this route? So the useful thing when these maps were first coming out is I would look at them to understand what the network was, right? And if I didn't see a street network on the map, then I knew I'm screwed, right? So the thing is that we have GPS in cars. There's just a way that you can move around that is not depending on a 1950s model of mobility, right? Use it. And so I think a lot of traffic modeling doesn't necessarily as much account for how humans actually behave. It's really primarily looking at, well, where's the capacity in the lanes, and right? And so there's much more richness and capacity. Humans just know how to navigate the environment if we have more choices to do that. When we limit the choice, when we create limited access, then it's limited, right? And then we get congestion.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much for being here. Andy, I'm going to let Andy have the last word. Thank you, everybody. Andy gets to wrap up. There you go.
All right. So one last big round of applause for our panelists and Mark Kass, our moderator today. So I know that our organizers would want me to remind you on behalf of everyone here, please continue to lean into the process of having these discussions. There are several events coming up where there will be talkbacks with the Department of Transportation. You can find those, I think that's August 1st and 2nd. Please find those. Keep the conversation going, both in a public frame like this and in the coffee shops and in our neighborhoods and in our offices as well. So thank you all so much for coming to Marquette today. Thank you to the Business Journal, and everyone have a great rest of your week.